The management as to what they feel should be the right policy, what they feel would be the consequence of their policy. They can persuade the government, the management in a particular line, but they have to stop at the point of persuasion.
There is liquidity problem. Can the government of India say, I will give you 100,000 crores worth of government securities. You give me the cash. The government of India cannot do it because it has passed a law giving up that power. These are all issues which need to be discussed. But our economic theoreticians will say, no. Printing of currencies is wrong.
The Reserve Bank board has been more advisory in character rather than deciding on specific issues. I would think that evolution is a good evolution, and that is a way in which the relationship between the Reserve Bank headed by the governor and the board should be.
The RBI is something like a seatbelt. As a driver, the driver being the government, it has the possibility of not putting on its seatbelt. But of course, if you don't put on your seatbelt, you get into an accident. The accident can be quite severe. So most drivers listen to that.
Well, it is easily the most keenly watched board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India in recent history. And in just a few hours, the board meetings, which are usually dull affairs, but this one promises to be anything but dull and dreary, Lata.
Absolutely. The government and the Reserve Bank have been locked in a power struggle, a standoff, if you please, on a range of issues. But the crux of the matter is about a couple of them, actually. How much capital does the central bank need? And how strict should the rules be governing lending by banks and the capital that banks must maintain?
Well, that is right. Those are going to be some of the contentious issues that are likely to be taken up by the Reserve Bank at its board meeting tomorrow. You heard some of the most influential voices. We gave you glimpses of what they had to say on some of these issues. But joining us now is another voice of influence, former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram, who has called the Monday board meeting of the Reserve Bank of India a day of reckoning for the central bank's independence and the Indian economy. Mr. Chidambaram, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC TV 18. Before we get into those specific issues, sir, let me start by asking you about what you make of the proposed thinking. And I don't know whether this is going to land up in the form of a proposal to be taken up by the board tomorrow, but the thinking within government that the Reserve Bank board should be more empowered, that the Reserve Bank should in fact become a board-managed institution.
That is a preposterous suggestion. Nowhere in the world is a central bank run by a board. Central bank equals governor, or central bank equals the chairman of the Fed or the governor of the European Central Bank, governor of Bank of England. I've never heard of a central bank being treated like a board-managed private or public company. Besides, who is on the board of RBI? These are private businessmen, private professionals pursuing their own profession or private businesses, heading conglomerates, corporates. How are they competent to lay down central bank policy? They are there to keep a watchful eye on how the Reserve Bank is reacting to situations and responding to situations, and they can give their feedback to the government. But to say that the central bank will be run like a board-managed company with these private businessmen and private professionals voting and the governor reduced to a chief operating officer, I think it's a preposterous suggestion, a suggestion that has to be dismissed out of hand. And I can't recall any such central bank anywhere in the world which is sought to be run as a board-managed company.
Okay, let me pick up on that point, sir, because one, you've raised the issue of competence or conflict of interest. For the benefit of our viewers, let's just take the example of the current board of the Reserve Bank of India. One of the issues that's likely to be taken up is the liquidity issue, the NBFC issue, and you have Bharat Doshi as well as N. Chandrasekharan, both run conglomerates, and they have NBFCs in the fold of those conglomerates sitting on the board of the Reserve Bank of India. So a lot of people are raising the conflict question. But, you know, we heard from former RBI governors, whether it was Raghuram Rajan or Rangarajan, all of them echoing the point of view that the board acts as a sounding board. It is advisory in nature. That has been the tradition. But within the thinking of the government, their view is that that might have been tradition, but the law does not prohibit the government from providing rules to the board to empower the board members further. What is the point of law, sir?
See, a section can be interpreted, a section can be misinterpreted. When a board is given to the Reserve Bank of India, that has to be read in the context of what a board is supposed to do vis-a-vis a central bank. You can't simply read the letter of the law and interpret it literally or in a pedestrian manner. You have to understand the purpose behind a law. What is the law for? What is the institution for which the law is being made? And having regard to the role of the central bank. You can't treat a central bank like any other commercial bank. And therefore, you take the letter of the law, but understand the spirit behind which eminent people are placed on the board. That is to bring to the notice of the governor, notice of the professionals running the central bank, the various issues that concern the economy. And leave it to the professionals, the central bankers, the governor, the deputy governor, to respond to a situation. That doesn't mean like Chandra and others are very, very competent professionals, but they can't decide what the policy of the RBI should be towards NBFC or towards MSMEs. They can't decide that policy. That has to be decided by the central bank, having regard to other economic indicators and the overall economic situation.
Okay. Mr. Chidambaram, considering your expertise in law, I wanted to guess what are the options before the Reserve Bank. Section 7(2) says, subject to any such direction, the general superintendence and direction of the affairs and business of the bank shall be entrusted to the Central Board of Directors, which may exercise all powers and do all acts which may be exercised or done by the bank. Section 7(3) just has one more phrase, save as otherwise provided in regulations made by the Central Board. The governor, and in his absence the deputy governor, shall also have powers of general superintendence and direction of the affairs and business of the bank, and may exercise all powers and do all acts and things which may be exercised and done by the bank. Identical phrases, except for this one phrase, save as otherwise provided in regulations made by the Central Board. Now, if the Central Board were to make regulations giving itself powers or empowering committees, what are the options before the governor?
That's not the way to read the sections. Central bank is a very specialized, special institution in an open economy. A central bank can't be treated like a commercial bank. A central bank has to maintain monetary stability. The central bank in India, the Reserve Bank, has many other functions. It manages the debt of the government. It keeps the reserves of various states. So this RBI is more powerful than other central banks around the world. Central bank has to set interest rates. Central bank has to do open market operations, having regard to the inflow and outflow of foreign money. It has too many functions. All these functions must be balanced and policy decisions taken by competent, professional central bankers. Now, when you say that the second proviso says that the governor will have the powers, that means what is meant all over the world. Central bank equals governor. And in the absence of the governor, the deputy governor. So central bank equals governor. What does the first proviso say? Yes, you can make regulations for overall superintendence. You can make regulations for things like meetings of the central bank, frequency of meetings, how the agenda should be prepared, how the research should be done, what information should be brought to the board before the board can advise. But that doesn't mean, under the first proviso, the board of directors will take over the powers of the governor and they become a collective governor. I've never heard of a collective called governor. A governor is the head of the central bank, and in him alone vests the responsibility to maintain monetary stability. So the first proviso can't be misinterpreted, distorted the way this government is trying to do. I think it's quite mischievous.
Mr. Chidambaram, there are, voting members and non-voting members. So clearly voting is envisaged by the Act. So therefore, my fear is all these provisions can be used to mean that the board can vote and direct the governor to do something. Let us assume, hypothetically, in the Monday meeting, the board votes to direct the governor to do something for SMEs or for NBFCs or for overall liquidity or for the banks under prompt corrective action. Then what are the options for the governor?
The board can pass a resolution or a decision or a sense of the board to say, we request the governor to look into these aspects. These are the facts that we are placing before the board, and the governor will take note of all these facts and devise suitable measures to enhance liquidity to NBFCs or to enhance credit flow to MSMEs. That the board can do. And that the board can do if there are dissenting voices on the board. If there are more than one view, the board can then say the sense of the board is, naturally by a majority, is that liquidity must be enhanced or credit should be enhanced. But if the board directs the governor to do this or do that, I think it is a gross interference with the independence of the central bank, and the governor must reject such a resolution as beyond the competence of the board. And if the board insists on passing such a resolution and insists on obedience to that resolution, the governor must resign.
Okay, you're saying that the governor must reject or must resign if he doesn't agree with the board resolution. But what about the fact that at least on some of these issues, the consultation process between the government as well as the Reserve Bank of India has happened under Section 7. Now, under Section 7, the government believes that, and it has sought legal opinion, and the legal opinion the government claims says that it can direct the central bank to take action as per the writ of the government.
No. You ask me for a legal opinion, I'll give a legal opinion to the contrary. Keep aside legal opinions. Please understand, central bank by definition is an independent organization. Look at the charter of the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank's charter says the ECB nor any of its constituent national central banks shall seek or receive any instruction from any government or any other body or any other authority. That's the core of central bank independence. If the government mischievously and the board ignorantly passes resolutions or so-called decisions directing the governor to do this or do that, the governor would be well within its rights to reject it as without jurisdiction, beyond the competence of the board. And if the board still insists that the resolution must be passed and the resolution must be obeyed, and a report should be given to the next board meeting about how the resolution was implemented, the governor must resign and make a statement to the public.
But, I want to come back to the larger issue of giving the board the powers or empowering the directors of the board of the Reserve Bank of India. And we had put this question to Mr. Malegaon, sir, on how regulations under Section 58 of the Act can in fact be processed. And I want to get your legal opinion on that as well. What Mr. Malegaon had said, that the board can make regulations with the prior approval of the government by notification in the official gazette. And then after this notification is done, within 30 days or so, that notification has to be placed before Parliament. and both houses of parliament have to approve it or modify that. So this requires parliamentary sanction as per what Mr. Malegam told us. Again, I go back to what we're hearing from the government, that this would not require parliamentary approval.
That's not correct. Regulations have to be placed before Parliament. All regulations, all subordinate legislation, or at least most subordinate legislation, have to be placed before Parliament. Parliament usually allows it to lie there for 30 days. Nobody looks at it or tries to amend it. But please understand, the regulation would be incompetent, would be without jurisdiction if it encroaches upon central bank independence. That is the unstated premise of a central bank law. It is the foundation of a central bank law. A central bank is independent of the government and of any other authority. Therefore, any regulation that encroaches upon central bank's independence is ultra vires. Let me give you an example, not exactly a parallel. For example, the Constitution says that the ministers shall aid and advise the governor. But governors, some governors, and in fact the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi took the view, you are only to aid and advise me, all power rests in me. But then the Supreme Court said no. The fundamental premise of a parliamentary democracy is that the governor is only a title or head. Aid and advice is a real three words which describe the powers in a parliamentary democracy. It is the ministers who aid and advise who have the real power. Therefore, just because the regulation says or the section says you can make regulations, you can pass resolutions, please understand, if any of that encroaches or interferes with the central bank's independence, it will be ultra vires. It will be struck down by courts.
Okay. Mr. Chidambaram, that's exactly what I was going to point out. I'm reading the powers of the Central Board to make regulations. That's Section 58 of the Act. It says the Central Board may, with the previous sanction of the government, by notification the Gazette, make regulations consistent with this Act. Now, are those words enough to say that the Central Board can't make? Yes.
The Act is premised on... Just a moment. The Act is premised on central bank independence. That is not negotiable.
Exactly.
Therefore, if the Act is premised on central bank independence, you cannot make a regulation contrary to that. There are any number of judgments which have interpreted the nature of rule-making power. It has to be for the purposes of the Act and not inconsistent with the provisions of the Act. There is a judgment of Chief Justice Deepak Mishra in the Gujarat Petroleum Gas Board case. There is a judgment of Justice Nariman speaking for the bench. You cannot make a regulation or a rule which undermines or literally destroys the basis on which and the purpose for which the law is made. If the central bank law is to ensure central bank's independence, then no resolution, no decision, no regulation can encroach upon that, and that will be struck down.
What would be the method of taking it to court, sir? Would it be done by the governor himself saying that I am seeking legal opinion? Or will it be left to people like you to say that this is ultra vires and you file a public interest litigation? How will this progress?
Technically, the governor can challenge it in a court of law, but I doubt a governor would do that. I think a governor would resign and make his point. And then public-spirited persons would have to file a writ petition in the High Court or the Supreme Court questioning this resolution, if a board resolution is made, or questioning a regulation, if a regulation is made under Section 58.
Let me come now to the specific issues that the board intends to take up. And what we have heard from the government... Sorry, you were saying you hope?
What is the question? I said I sincerely hope that the government will not take this extremely adventurous step. I think just as they did not understand the enormous consequences of demonetization, they do not understand the enormous consequences of such a decision being taken and the governor being forced to quit. They do not understand it.
Okay, let me ask you about the specifics now, sir. Of the issues which the board is expected to deliberate upon, according to the finance minister, it's the liquidity issue and the SME issue that will be given priority. And this business of the surplus framework will only be something that will be deliberated upon, but no decision is likely to be taken at the board meeting tomorrow. Now, you've had your say as far as the surplus issue is concerned, but since that is unlikely to be something that we see being taken forward tomorrow in any meaningful way, let me ask you about the two specific issues of what happens to the prompt corrective action framework, because the government believes that relaxation or a review of the norms is necessary, as well as some sort of lifeline for MSMEs. What would your expectation be on both those?
I have no problem. All those matters must be discussed on the board, and the very rich experience of the board members must be brought to the discussion, and they must be able to persuade the central bank, the governor and his deputies, that it's absolutely necessary to enhance liquidity to NBFCs. It's necessary to enhance credit to MSMEs. I'm entirely in favor of enhancing liquidity. I'm entirely in favor of enhancing credit. In fact, I've been writing about credit to industry and credit to MSMEs for a long time. These are matters which must be discussed on the board, and the varied and rich experience of the board members, with all the data and information they can command, they should bring it to the board. And I'm sure the governor, an intelligent person, a thinking person, will receive all those inputs and make suitable changes. That's the way to go. But you can't direct a governor to do this or do that. You must win by the power of your argument and the strength of your data.
Okay. We will have to see which way this proceeds tomorrow. But on the issue of surplus, sir, and again, as I pointed out, our understanding is that this is only at a discussion stage and there is going to be no direction to the government. This is not a matter that's being dealt with under Section 7 to start with anyway. But you have serious reservations on the surplus issue. Now, this was an issue that was brought up by someone that you highly regard as well, the former Chief Economic Advisor, Arvind Subramaniam. How much is too much in terms of the Reserve Bank's capital? And his view was that at 27%, it's significantly higher than the global norm. And perhaps 12% would be best. Mr. Maligam's opinion is that don't put a number in place. It has to be reviewed basis circumstances and the situation that the governor and the central bank deals with. What's your thought?
It's an academic issue now. That was a live issue when the governor was not transferring the entire annual surplus to the government. In fact, that happened during the UPA time. But we didn't bring the fight to the streets. We tried to persuade the governors to increase the transfer of surplus. I have written Dr. Reddy was loath to transfer the entire surplus. Dr. Subbarao was a little more liberal. But then Dr. Raghuram Rajan, from 2013-14, when the accounts of 2013-14 were finalized, a new government had come into place. And based on the accounts of 2013-14, the Reserve Bank transferred the entire surplus to the government. Since then, 2014-15, 2015-16, 2016-17, they have transferred the entire surplus. So that issue is academic. So the reserves have been built based on part of the surpluses transferred prior to 2013-14. They're not coming out of current surpluses. They were past surpluses. So why is this government getting hot under the collar about those surpluses? Unless they are eyeing those reserves. All right, let's assume for the sake of argument that 27% of all reserves as a proportion of assets is too high. All right, sit down and work it out and then decide what you will do with what you consider as excess surplus. If you consider the 27% too high, let's assume you agree on, say, 18%. What will you do with the 9%? The 9% can't be transferred to the government in one financial year as a windfall to the government. The country has to debate what should be done with this 9%. It's not a windfall for the current government. Therefore, I think this is not an issue, and there's no tearing hurry to decide this issue. This government has barely 4 months to go before elections are called. This should not be opened up now. As long as the current annual surplus is entirely transferred to the government, this issue is not an issue that is to be great hurry.
Mr. Chidambaram, just to scratch that point a little further, let us assume that after the November 19th board meeting, a high-level committee is set up, and that high-level committee says that, let us assume 3 lakh crore is excess reserves. What would you do as an important member of the opposition if that money were transferred or demanded?
Surely that committee will not give a report before the 26th of May 2019. If I had any influence over that committee, I'll tell them to delay it by at least a year.
Okay.
So that things will cool down. And let's assume that the committee says about 3 lakh crore is surplus. Then there should be a genuine debate about how best to use a 3 lakh crore. Do we use it, say, to recapitalize the banks? In which event, as Dr. Rajan pointed out, if that money is used to recapitalize the banks, or that money is spent by government for expenditure, he would have to suck out liquidity, and net there won't be any difference. Do you use that money to retire public debt? That's a possible option. So the ways in which that money can be used are many, and each one of them has to be examined carefully to decide what is the optimal use to which that money can be put to. But that's not what this government is doing. This government is in a tearing hurry to grab the 3 lakh crore or 4 lakh crore and try to spend its way into winning an election in May 2019. They were disappointed when demonetization did not give them the windfall that they boasted about. And now they think that this is one way to lay their hands on a large sum of money. But that's the wrong place to start. That's the wrong motive. And for that reason, suppose a committee is appointed, that committee should not give a report for the next 12 months at least.
Okay. We hope they look at it as 20 years of surplus, and therefore something that is to be returned over a period of time and not in just 2 months. Let's hope that's what the committee will do if one is appointed. So just one more legal issue on Section 7. We never touched the core.
Even if it is returned, even if it is returned, the committee must clearly recommend what in its view is the best use to which that money can be put. That decision cannot be left to the whim and fancy of the current government. There has to be a consensus about how best to use that money, which has been built over a long period of time.
Okay, Mr. Chidambaram, I wanted to ask you the Section 7(1), which we didn't discuss. We discussed 2 and 3. 1 is the ability of the government to give directions to the governor after consulting with him. Now, past governors, some of them who also served under the UPA, said that this threat was raised jokingly by their finance ministers as well. What would your reaction be if that section was used and the government has its way against the will of the governor on, say, how much of Basel capital or prompt corrective action rules or any of those rules?
Never. In all these years, this section has never been invoked, never even been mentioned in conversations. I've worked with 4 governors. Not once did Section 7 come up in any conversation with any governor, not even jokingly. As I wrote on a column 2 weeks ago, the power of Section 7 lies in its non-use. It's like the nuclear button. You don't use it, but you have it. Section 7 can only be invoked when, say, a governor turns rogue. Suppose there is a governor who's gone berserk. Then perhaps Section 7, the nuclear button, can be pressed. But never in a normal situation where the governor is in dialogue with the government, never should Section 7 be invoked, not even mentioned in private discussions between the finance minister and the governor. The problem with this government is it does not engage the governor. I mean, I would be on the phone twice a week with Dr. Reddy, maybe more with Dr. Rajan, and I would meet the governor in person, either in Delhi or Mumbai, at least once a month, and certainly once in 6 weeks. This government does not engage with the governor. That's how they lost Dr. Rajan, and I sincerely hope they will not be so foolish as to lose Dr. Patel also.
Well, the grouse in North Block is that the governor is not accessible, sir. So it's not that the government is not making the calls or not trying to reach out. The buzz in North Block is that Mint Street is not listening to what North Block has to say. But before we end, sir, let me ask you what you made of Mr. Gurumurthy's comments. He spoke a short while ago, just ahead of the board meeting, on a whole bunch of issues, including the way to address the current account deficit. He said significant import restrictions are the order of the day. He also believes that demonetization, without demonetization, the economy would have collapsed. He believes that we shouldn't do more than the Basel requirements and that we are doing more than Basel requirements, which is curbing the bank's lending ability. There was a whole host of economic views laid out by Mr. Gurumurthy, who also happens to be on the Reserve Bank of India's board. What did you make of them?
Why should I comment on the views of an individual whose allegiance to this government is well known? So I decline to comment on that. I will only answer your questions, and I've answered your questions.
Well, you certainly have, sir. One final question before we let you go. Do you hope or do you have confidence that we could see a middle path being arrived at that board meeting tomorrow? We are given to understand that the governor did meet with the Prime Minister, and perhaps some of those contentious issues, there has been some sort of meeting of minds. What would your expectation be at this point?
I sincerely hope so. There are some very wise men on the board, men and women who are not politically affiliated or who don't wear their political allegiance on their collar. They are independent professionals, independent business persons, and they should participate in that board meeting, unlike the infamous demonetization meeting, which was called at Delhi, and hardly any independent director participated in it. So I think the independent directors must bring their experience and sobriety and wisdom to the board and try to bring data and information to the board meeting so that the governor has all the information and can take a suitable decision. I think there are enough independent, wise men and women on that board.
Two more voices of influence. Let me go back across to Lata to talk about the items on the agenda of this crucial board meeting. Lata, let's discuss the issues before the board. Now, as we've heard the finance minister say, liquidity, specifically NBFC liquidity, as well as the MSME space and the problems plaguing the MSME space, these are likely to be the two priority items on the board's agenda. Give me a sense of what issues within these overarching themes are likely to be taken up.
Well, I guess liquidity is going to be a very important issue. I mean, I don't know what more the Reserve Bank can do, but, that there is a strain on liquidity both in the banking and in the NBFC space is something the government will want to drive home about, and therefore the board members as well. The Reserve Bank has bought government bonds of 40,000 crores both in October, and another 40,000 crores will be bought in November as well. That's a lot of liquidity they have pushed in. You know, when you buy the bond, you push in 80,000 crores of liquidity. This year, they have already pushed in about 1,26,000 crore liquidity. And I'm sure they will say that they will continue to keep that pace. They've also done longer term repos, 56-day repos, 28-day repos, so that, market participants have assured money 2-month money from the Reserve Bank. So a lot has been done, and I would assume that the Reserve Bank can give a commitment that it will continue to keep the system well hydrated. A second point, what I'm saying is that a middle ground can be found over there, with the RBI saying that we have taken your note of your concern, we will take note of your concern in the future as well. A middle ground can be found. With respect to specific NBFC liquidity, I think even the government now is would be of the view that there is no need for special liquidity. Nobody is even talking about any crisis in the debt market or a contagion. In fact, we had Keki Mistry on the channel telling us that the need for a special line of credit is now over. That event is past us. And therefore, my sense is that will not be raked up too much. The issue you mentioned is most likely to come, and that is the SME issue. I think over there, the Reserve Bank can extend a helping hand. I mean, they may not be able to do things like, recognize NPAs after 180 days or things like that. But even in the last 1 year, the Reserve Bank has given packages that those who have registered for GST, their bad loans will be classified as bad loans only after 180 days. They could extend that concession till March 31st. It's not very difficult for them to provide some kind of a concession for loans under 25 crore or under 5 crore, or however they define SME and MSME credit. I think middle ground will be found there. Middle ground is a little more difficult in Basel and in PCA. If they were to, be insisted, then there can be a lot of rancor, because Basel from 1998, we have kept minimum capital as 9% and Basel requires 8%. So, over 5 governors and over 5 governments, NDA, UPA, UPA2, NDA, okay, 4 governments, the same thing has prevailed, and therefore it may be very difficult for the Reserve Bank to change it now, something that stood the test of 20 years. And likewise in PCA, maybe some concessions could be given, but I don't see much, because all those PCA banks, most of them have reported such horrendous numbers in the second quarter. It may be a little difficult, but middle ground can definitely be found in MSME or, in liquidity. So, an olive branch can be, I think, from what I hear from people who have visited Delhi, you would know this better, it seems to be more an ego standoff as well. I mean, we keep talking and they're not listening, seems to be Delhi's point of view. So perhaps even if they are heard and, some concessions given, maybe things will sort out. Let's hope for the best.
Well, I'll tell you, the word that we were hearing here in the corridors of power was statesmanship, the need for statesmanship. Let's see if both sides come to the table with that mindset. But before we go any further, 2 former RBI governors, Raghuram Rajan and C. Rangarajan, on the current standoff with the government, as well as the importance of the independence of the central bank and why the board can only act as a sounding board, as an advisory board. It should not direct the governor to act in any particular direction. Take a look.
In a sense, the way it has evolved is that the Reserve Bank board has been more advisory in character rather than deciding on specific issues. Therefore, that is the nature of the board, and that is the nature of the way in which decisions have so far been taken. I would think that evolution is a good evolution, and that is a way in which the relationship between the Reserve Bank headed by the governor and the board should be. Important change that has happened, which has given autonomy to the Reserve Bank of India in terms of monetary policy. The finance minister gets to know what the change in the policy rate is along with you and me. And therefore, that is an important change that has happened. Therefore, I would say in the present situation, Section 7 should not be used because it will give wrong signals. It is time for the government and the RBI to sit together in a spirit of accommodation and find answers to the problem. Section 7 should not be used now.
I worry that in the recent past, a lot of unnecessary noise has been inserted into the board deliberations, and I wonder if this is something that can be unwound or rolled back, perhaps by taking away some of the people responsible for the additional noise. I think it's important for both sides to back off, and for some, hopefully, elder persons in the government, as well as former RBI people, to create a better understanding between the two. And it may, again, I say, require looking at what has prompted this sort of recent angst and trying to deal with that problem. And I think Dr. Acharya should be commended for just sounding a warning. I don't think that I've seen a lot of press saying he's comparing India to Argentina and so on. I don't think that was his intent in any way. I think he was just saying, let us be careful in these uncertain times. That's a warning that is important for us to heed, and heed it in the way it was given, respectfully, recognizing the fact that the RBI is not above the government. It is an arm, if you will, of the government, and saying, look, as a responsible part of the government, it is my duty to warn that there are certain sort of issues if we go further. The RBI is something like a seatbelt. As a driver, the driver being the government, it has the possibility of not putting on its seatbelt. But of course, if you don't put on your seatbelt, you get into an accident, the accident can be quite severe. So most drivers listen to that annoying noise which comes when you don't put on your seatbelt and actually put on the seatbelt because they know it's for their own good. And historically, the relationship between the RBI and the government has been precisely this.
We count down to the crucial Reserve Bank of India's board meeting. Here is a rare interview. Veteran Chartered Accountant Y.H. Malegam, he has served for 21 years on the board of the Reserve Bank of India, and he believes that under the current laws, that means under the Reserve Bank Act, the RBI board cannot direct the governor. To put it simply, Mr. Malegam says the board can persuade, but it must stop at persuasion. Take a look.
Now, even for that matter, for instance, there is a demand from the financial sector players that a line of credit be given by the Reserve Bank to NBFCs, non-bank finance companies. Now, there are two members of the board at the moment, Mr. Chandrasekaran, chairman of Tata Sons. They have Tata Capital, an NBFC. Bharat Doshi of M&M, they have MMFSL. It would be conflicting, isn't it, to allow a board like this to tell the governor that you do this for NBFCs?
No, that is one part of it. As I said, one is the question of interest. The other thing you've got to remember is that the Reserve Bank has multiple objectives. You have monetary policy, you have inflation, you have exchange rate, amongst many other things. And in fact, there is this well-known impossible trinity.
Yes.
If you do something in the monetary policy for affecting inflation, it has an impact on growth. If you do something for growth, it may have an impact upon foreign exchange. So there is a very difficult balancing act which has to be done. And it can only be done by professionals who understand these things. In fact, if you look at the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Commission,
yes,
it examined this whole issue of why do you need an independent regulator. And it has given 4 reasons or advantages of having an independent regulator, of which 2 are, in my opinion, very important. The first one says you need that regulator because the regulator has specialized officer staff who have domain knowledge of that field on which regulation has to be done. So here you have in the Reserve Bank central bankers who understand these things. Board members don't have that sort of expertise. And second, and very important, they have said that this provides for a stability in policy, because otherwise, if that policy was made by the government, it would be subject to changes with any political changes which take place in the government. Now, these are all the reasons why, ever since the Reserve Bank was formed or nationalized, from say 1969
Yes.
till now,
Yeah.
I am not aware of any situation where the boards of the Reserve Bank gave directions to the government. They make a very important contribution by giving advice. They are a sounding board for the governors, and the governors actually use that.
They listen to them.
Without revealing what they intend to do, they discuss various options with the board. They get their advice on matters, but the final decision still remains with the governor.
But still, there would be the act would have expected some voting to happen. After all, it says that the two government nominees are non-voting members. It says that the deputy
Yes.
governors are non-voting members.
Yes.
So voting is envisaged
I
under the
agree,
act.
but it's not as if the board doesn't have powers on certain matters. All I'm saying is it traditionally, and the tradition is also as important as the actual provisions of the act. Traditionally, board members have not made any directions on policy, but they can make directions on administration. They can make directions upon other matters which are concerned with internal management. That is where the question of voting may come in.
Now, God forbid, if it were to happen that on November 19th, because some board members have strong views on some issues, they vote and pass a resolution asking the governor to do something, either loosen the controls on banks or give a special line of credit to SMEs. What can the governor do? Can the governor say that please go back and make regulations and come? This is outside the purview of
Well, I
current
can't
regulations?
tell you what the governor will do.
No, would he be
But-
within his powers to say that?
Theoretically, he could ask for a legal advice as to whether this is within the competence of the board or not.
Okay. Well, that would be an important help that
Yes.
he will need. Do you think that the Reserve Bank board, in the November 19th meeting or in any subsequent meeting, be able to influence any of the policies of the governor? Can they, can the board's advice be set aside by the governor?
You see, what I feel correctly is the correct position is like this. The members of the board are knowledgeable people about the industry, about the social problems, etc. So they can give valuable inputs to the governor and the management as to what they feel should be the right policy, what they feel would be the consequence of their policy. They can persuade the government, the management in a particular line. But they have to stop at the point of persuasion. They cannot direct. That is the point I'm making.
Okay.